Okay, I'm going to mute everybody right now as we get going here. But it's great to see everybody. Um,
Mhm.
my name's Kelvin Chin, and I do this monthly open forum Q&A about anything about the afterlife, basically. What happens after we biologically die? What happens after people die? Where do we go? What happens? And so forth and so on. So open forum means you can ask any questions about anything about the afterlife, and or you can share experiences you may have had, because I know, just looking at around the room right now, the live room, I know some folks have lost children, they've lost loved ones, parents, siblings, and so forth. So if you want to share anything, feel free. This is kind of a communal sharing group, if you want to think of it that way too. Um, when I'm talking about ideas and concepts that I've thought through and experiences that I've had, they're generally based on two things: experiences and then thinking it through. Does that make sense? These ideas and so forth, as I interpret different experiences that I've had over the last 50 years or so in this arena. Um, but again, these are my interpretations. So I encourage everybody, I say this, just a reminder to folks, all my students out there, and I consider you guys my students, just anybody I'm working with, in other words, to think about things yourself, and don't go changing your belief systems because Kelvin Chin said something that, even if it makes sense to you, what I'm saying, you just figure it out. And does it make sense? Oh, I can take this much of what he said, or maybe not this, but I respect that. And not only do I respect it that you do that, but I encourage you to do that, because we are all on our own journeys. We are all on our own unique journeys, figuring stuff out for eternity. It is what my guess is. That's my strong guess, is that we're around here for a long time. And as Woody Allen said, eternity's a really, really long time, especially near the end. That's what Woody Allen said. For those of you who don't get the joke, there is no end to eternity. But anyway, um, so whether it's eternity or a really, really, really long time, either way, I'm here to try to help people navigate that and live life with more happiness, more enjoyment, less suffering. That's the bottom line of everything I do. I'm not here to try to change people's belief systems or this or that. Okay. So we have different topics sometimes, not all the time. Sometimes we just do a straight open forum Q&A, and you guys ask questions about whatever, which we will do at the halfway through the session today. We usually go an hour and a half. I don't like to go too much longer, so that people have some they can get on with their lives and do other things besides just sit and talk about this stuff for 8 hours a day. Because we could go that long. Some of my sessions have gone almost that long, but I'm cutting this one down because we do this every month. So you can bring questions again next month. This is free worldwide, and I do it Facebook Live and on Zoom, obviously, and I record it. By the way, if you miss any part of the session, or you miss a session completely, or you want to catch up and look at the last year and a half of these monthly sessions, you can go either to my YouTube channel, just Google my name on YouTube. I have 150 videos there. My actual channel is called Kelvin Chin Turning Within. But if you just put Kelvin Chin, you'll get me and a bunch of 20-year-olds who are doing crazy reels and stuff in China and Malaysia. But you'll find me that way on YouTube somehow. Or you can go to kelvinchin.org, which is my more spiritual website, and you can go to the monthly Afterlife page, and you'll see all the videos are all collected right there, easy for you to access. All the monthly videos for the last year and a half. So you can catch up and watch those at your leisure. But sometimes we do themes, and we're going to do a kind of theme-ish kind of thing today. And William Baldridge, who's here with us today live, has helped me the last several sessions come up with some great ideas. So Widge came up with these ideas. We're going to chat about these. As I said, this is kind of a discussion. Feel free to write down questions when Widge and I are kind of having a discussion about this. He and I are going to have a little dialogue about this, and you guys can write down questions, and then you can join that dialogue, and it'll be a larger conversation when we open the floor up to, the open forum Q&A. Okay? So we have some slides here that, thanks to Widge, he put them together, and I'm going to share screen with you guys. All right? So hold on a second. Let me make sure that I brought them up. Let's see, where are they? Here they are. Okay, let me share screen with you guys. Today's February 29th, leap year this year. So obviously next month and subsequent months besides February will always be on the 30th of every month, and it's at the same time, 12 Pacific time. Let's see, share screen. Here we go. Here we go. All right, can everybody see that? Yep, everybody seeing that? Thumbs up. Yep, good. All right, Widge, why don't you unmute yourself, Widge, and kind of give us a little intro to the what we're doing, and we'll just kind of, do what we do, Widge.
Sure. We wrote these questions really to specifically to generate conversation and interest. We're definitely not espousing a particular point of view in these questions. They're meant to sort of draw out conversation or to kind of highlight issues that we thought might be interesting to talk about. So should I run through them? Maybe run through a few of them, the ones on the slide?
Let's do one at a time. Time. I'll click it. Can you see that? Can you guys see that? Or is that covered up by the...
Perfect. Yeah, it's real clear.
Yeah, you can see it. Good.
Good. So the first question is, do we merge with the absolute or with God when we pass on? That's a popular question. Not that we're proposing that there is an absolute or assigning particular roles to a God, but that's a question I think we've all wondered about. So yeah.
Go ahead.
You want to jump into it?
Yeah. So I mean, first of all, I want to make a comment about God, and we're not here to promote whether you believe that God exists or doesn't God exist, or God does not exist. Okay. We're just using the phrase God because many people do believe in God. And if you do, that's fine. If you don't, that's fine too. Whether it's God or the absolute sometimes is a phrase that's used, or the universe, or sometimes people use the energy, the universal energy or something. People will use different phrases, but the point isn't about God here. The point of that Widge was raising this bullet point about was about merging. Okay. So that's...
And it's about your individuality merging, sort of your personality.
So let's talk about what merging, what merging means. Okay. So there's a lot of confusion, I think, out there in spiritual groups and spiritual communities and spiritual teachers about what merging means. So it's not really complicated. The meaning of merging simply means, as Widge just kind of alluded to, you lose your individuality. You don't know who you are. You have no individual identity anymore. Okay, that's what merging means. That's what the English word means, and that's what it means in spirituality. That's what it means. Now, there are many spiritual teachers out there who don't understand that, and I've been at conferences, and I'm not going to name names, but there's a very, very, very well-known psychic medium who charges, I can't remember if she charges $400, $500, $600 an hour. It's at least $400 an hour for a session. And she's a very frequent speaker at one of the conferences that I used to speak at, that I have spoken at a number of times. And I wasn't at one of the conferences, but one of my students who've taken these classes and knows what merging means was texting me, and he said she's up there talking to 500 people right now saying that after you die, you merge. And he's saying, he's texting me saying, well, if that's the case, then who is she doing her psychic medium work with? Right? And she's talking to dead grandmothers and dead children and dead loved ones and friends, and the other side are angels. Or it doesn't have to be a dead human on the other side, as long as it's an individual mind that has an individual identity. Angel X or Y or Z, Archangel Michael has an individual identity. There's probably billions of angels on the other side, and there's billions or trillions or quadrillions of dead humans on the other side, right? So if you cannot communicate with what I call cosmic soup, and that's essentially what you're talking about when people say we merge after we die. Okay, it's the wrong word to use. If you want to say we connect with a field of light and we retain our individuality as a light being, and yet we feel really connected to other beings, that's not the same as merging and losing your individuality and not knowing who you are anymore. Okay, go ahead, Witch.
No, I don't have much to add to that. I think that's exactly right. There are a lot of people in the so-called spiritual world who advocate for this notion that if you evolve far enough, the sort of spiritual materialism problem, if you evolve far enough, then you merge with the absolute when you die, and just doesn't make any sense for a lot of reasons. So
Yeah.
anyway, I think we've addressed the main issues there. And the second one is kind of the same thing. Well, the second question is, if we don't merge, what part of us continues after we pass away? And that's the other side of the coin.
Yeah,
So,
and that's an interesting point, because obviously our biological, well, let's talk about the obvious. Our biological body does not continue after we biologically die. So we lose our biological body, and we lose all need to take care of that because it doesn't exist anymore. A biological, well, it exists on planet Earth, maybe in the ground, the biological body, or if you, cremate yourself and so forth and so on. But, it's obviously ashes, and et cetera, et cetera. But it doesn't exist in the way that it's functioning when we are alive in it, is my point.
right,
So obviously that's the case. So what continues is our consciousness, our mind, our soul, our spirit. And I don't mean just our mind, like a lot of people think of their mind in a very, very limited way. I'm not talking about the mind in that way. I'm talking about the mind in this very expanded the way that's identifiable and can focus itself, but also is aware and it can experience the vastness of itself as well. Our own mind, our own individual mind, not some universal mind. That's another thing that kind of relates here, which I don't know if you want to comment on this too, but I'll just say this, and you can add to it if you want to. We're not connecting with universal mind either. There's no universal mind that I am aware of, or that Jesus, Jehovah, Shankara, Vyasa, John the Baptist, or anybody else who I've communicated with, or archangels I've communicated with in 1986 and so on and so on. Nobody talks about experiencing a universal mind. There may be belief systems on the other side that believe that there's universal mind, just like there is on this side. There's people who believe that. But from all my experience over the last 50 years, nobody I've talked with on this side or the other side has experienced that. If they've experienced what they think that is, it's an experience of the vastness of either themselves or the vastness of the universe, or a third possibility is the vastness of another mind. That's possible, right? Go ahead.
Yeah, this is just such a fascinating topic because I think you and George have brought so much sort of clear thinking to it. Um, the notion that people are merge with the absolute mind or with the one mind doesn't make much sense when you consider how many people and how many of us here have pretty clear experiences of other people after they've passed on, not just regular people, but entities like Jehovah and Jesus and Gurudev, of all, people who should have, if this whole merging thing were true, shouldn't be around anymore. And yet, what you're saying is that not only are these individuals around, and that's the experience of many of us, but they're not talking about merging or an absolute mind or anything like that either. It seems to have been an innocent inference that was based on this experience of expandedness that we all have when we settle down and turn within. And based on that real expanded experience of our own mind, we people started leaping to the conclusion that our mind, that there was an absolute mind that we were somehow transcending to and merging with when we meditated, and when we died, we would just merge with that absolute. And if we're, first of all, if we're eternal, then then part of our individuality, i.e., our mind, is probably eternal,
Mhm.
and that means it doesn't die or cease to exist. So the whole merging thing just doesn't make sense. But some part of our individuality existing on an eternal basis uh, seems to be a much more reasonable approach to things. Um, and I just want to emphasize your point about there. There's thousands of years of tradition, particularly in Hinduism,
Mhm.
of and Buddhism, of thinking that we do merge. So there are a whole lot of people that are really excited about it on this side, and I suppose on the other side too. So it's a formidable body of thought that has thousands of years of momentum. But I think you and George are making sense of it, and
Yeah, and
the difficulty.
there's two things that come to mind which out of what you just said, which was great what you said, very helpful. Um, One is, why does that happen? Why do people get excited? I think people get excited for a number of reasons, but one of the reasons that I was thinking about just now is that people are not real happy here. A lot of people. Some people are. But I think a lot of people feel that it's a real struggle to live in a biological body, and I'm not saying it isn't. I've had my own struggles, in life and in various ways. And it doesn't have to be biological, it could be financial, it could be relational, it could be a lot of things. Okay. But so is there a lot of, you got to work, you got to buy, you have to feed this thing we call a biological body. You got to clothe it, you got to shelter, all that stuff. And is that a challenge? Yeah. And I think that for some people, unfortunately, it's so much of a challenge that they want to get the heck out. And whether it's they believing in merging or whether they just believe in heaven, because there's a big group of people who don't believe in merging or reincarnation and all that, but they just want to get out of here, right? And they go to heaven. It's great. Can't wait to get to heaven. Then everything's going to be cool, you know? That belief system, or the Buddhists, that this is all an illusion. This is all an illusion, you know, Maya, that phrase, some of you may have heard of that phrase, Maya, Maya. It's an illusion. This world is an illusion. Your mind is just making this up and so forth and so on. This notion that it's not real puts us in a place of, in my opinion, increased suffering because you're never living in the present. You're not enjoying and you're not being productive in the here and now. So I think it's a terrible thing. And you guys know I have past life memories of I talk about them in this book here. My past life memories of being a Buddhist monk several times. So I've been there, done that. And it's just, so that I think is a part of one comment I wanted to make. The other comment I wanted to make is in terms of this universal mind idea that sometimes people come up with, this concept they come up with. I think that also could be, this is one of my conjectures, it could be a misinterpretation of the experience that any of us can have of what I call the superhighway of information, of data that exists, that where all this, it's almost like there's a library or something, if those of you who remember what a library is, or a database of information, almost like electronically, or like literally, like energetically, that exists in our universe here that you can't see and so forth, that you can access, that any mind, because our mind is our consciousness, our soul, our spirit is energy, right? So that our individual energy can access, and without needing a library card, if those of you again know what a library was or is, can, can just access information from that. And I think that there can be a misinterpretation that that is a mind. And that's not a mind, in my opinion, the way I think of what a mind is, because it doesn't have the ability, the free will ability to make decisions.
Yeah.
So that's how I define a mind. So I think of it more as inanimate energy field, we could call it, where anybody can access any past experiences that anybody's ever had or anything that's ever happened.
Yeah, it makes sense. It's like a huge interrelational database, and maybe all points in space and time and all pieces of information are connected to each other.
Yeah,
And
yeah. What was that? You would know better than I would, like where this phrase, the Akashic records, comes from. But is that a Vedic thing? That's a Vedic.
yeah, it's a Vedic thing. It's
Yeah.
yeah,
And I think that what I'm talking about, again, I don't know exactly what they all mean by this phrase, the Akashic records, but it's like that, if not that,
Mhm.
is what I'm talking about. But it's inanimate. It is.
Yeah, right. It's like a huge library or just a book with a million pages that you can supposedly go through and find
Yeah,
information, but
yeah.
it's not animate by any means.
Yeah, yeah, and it's a collection. So it's like it's it's not just your stuff. It's all stuff.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
But it's stuff. It's not mental that can make a decision. It's stuff.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
the way I look at it. Anyway. But yeah, this to Widge's last point on his slide here, when I meditate, I sometimes experience a deep quietness and peacefulness. Is this what people mean when they speak of unity, this idea of unity or merging? And I think it is. I think you're right, Widge. I think that because when you experience this incredibly deep quietness, sometimes, not all the times, but sometimes in meditation, or you don't have to meditate either. You could be lying on a hillside,
Yeah.
you know, just spacing out, looking at the clouds go by on a nice day, or you could be at the beach, alone and in the sand dunes and just kind of spacing out, looking at the ocean, and you could have these moments where it's just incredibly peaceful inside, and you might feel so connected and as if your consciousness is expanded, your mind or consciousness is expanded and connected with the surfing waves and so forth and so on.
Yeah,
It
yeah,
doesn't mean that you are the wave. It
right.
doesn't mean that you have merged and you've united, to use Widge's word in this third bullet. You haven't united and become the wave. That's
Yeah,
what unity and merging means. It means you lose your individuality. You don't know who you are, and you are that. And so
yeah.
sometimes
It's
people will use that phrase, but you're not literally that. You're still standing on the sand dune with your friends.
yeah, it's like getting confused between a molecule of water and an entire ocean of water. It's like you can still have a lot in common with all the other molecules in the ocean, but you're still a freaking molecule of water. You're not the ocean.
Yeah,
And
that's a great
it,
analogy because I've heard other spiritual teachers use that analogy to explain the merging thing. And
yeah,
that's
yeah,
where they miss exactly what you just said, Widge. They miss the point. Because if it's yes, we can, let's say we are all streams or rivers or bodies of water. Can we a collection of a body of water, a stream or a river, right? And so our energy, our body, our soul is a collection of energy. Okay, so where the stream is going down to the ocean is what Widge is saying. Does the stream connect with the ocean? Yes. Do the water molecules of the stream and the water molecules of the ocean, do they still remain water molecules? Yes, they retain their individuality. So it's like we are a water molecule. We are one of the water molecules in the stream or the river going to the ocean. We don't lose our water molecule ness, if that's a word I just made up.
yeah, yeah. So can I add a point? I want to make
Yeah,
an editorial point here that I hope is interesting for others, but to me,
yeah.
it's really exciting because what we're all going through here, I mean, here today in this Zoom meeting, and the hundreds of students you've taught and the thousands that we've meditated together with over the years, there's a huge quorum of those of us who are just normal people who turn within every day. And we've developed a lot of experiences doing that over the last however many 5, 10, 50, 55 years. We've been doing it for a long time, and there are a lot of us. And as a result, we're able to kind of reflect among ourselves as friends on perceptions and inferences and conclusions reached by a few who were doing this, 5,000 years ago. And they very understandably leapt to some conclusions that just don't really hold water. And it's not that any of us are any spiritual savants, it's just that we have this network effect. There are thousands of us who are reasonably intelligent and can communicate reasonably well. And we're going back and forth with each other, and we're able to think more rationally about some of these things, and we're just coming to some obvious conclusions, like the fact that folks 3, 4, 5,000 years ago got caught up with this very reasonable, very romantic kind of conclusion that they leapt to about unity. And now in 2024, we're able to say, yeah, but it really doesn't make any sense at all. So we should kind of move on. So it's a really exciting time, I think, for those of us to be alive together as a group, communicating with each other, and able to think together, as a group, and uncover some of these old misunderstandings that really didn't add any value because they kind of led people in the wrong direction. So it's just a real pitch for us hanging together and discussing these things together as friends. I think there's a lot of value in it. So
Yeah, no,
back to
that's a great point. That's a great point, Widge. That's a great point. And I think to Widge's point, there's this certain self-referential effect that went on. It goes
you.
on in any group. It doesn't today, whenever, but especially what Widge is referring to, like this kind of self-referential nature of that small group of 10 or 15 or 20 gurus
Mhm,
all
mhm,
sharing the same similar experiences of this connection, and then coming to the conclusion and making that leap to say that they were getting close to merging, because obviously none of them thought that they had merged, because they
yeah,
were also
yeah.
viewing merging as losing their individuality, but they were getting closer and closer to this merging idea. That's what they were thinking. And so now they've rethought it with a little bit, some more thought and some external input and so forth.
Mhm, mhm.
So that's what I think what was going on also in terms of what Widge is talking about. That's great. Yeah. So let's go to the next one, Widge. You want to?
Okay, good. Yeah. So for thousands of years, people who meditated learned to meditate under a master. and continued to study meditation under that master. So the topic for discussion here is, wouldn't I progress faster under a master's supervision?
Yeah. So
Live.
so let's define terms, what master means here. So when Widge is using the phrase master, you want to talk about that, Widge? Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm talking about a guru who is considered to be sort of essentially divine, or only makes right decisions and has vastly more knowledge about us than we know about ourselves, and vastly more knowledge about everything else than we can know. So, sort of quasi divine beings who know better about what we need to do than we can know for ourselves. That's
Yeah, and to use one word, perfect being.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
That's the way
Great.
the word master has been used in spiritual circles
Mm-hmm.
for, you know, tens of thousands of years. That's a perfect being, and as when Widge uses the phrase right action, means never makes a mistake. So it doesn't matter what they say, what they do. If they ask you to carry the water up and down the stairs 50 times, you don't ask them why, you just follow their instructions because they are a perfect being. This is the thinking. I'm not saying this is true, but this is the thinking in that school, in that school of spirituality, which really is the undercurrent of, really, you think about it, Widge, right? All the traditions, all the
Yeah, all of them. Yeah, and it's been going. It's been the main course of spiritual progress for thousands of years for all the traditions. I mean, you check into a Roman Catholic monastery today, and you know, the abbot or whatever, the leader of the monastery, has sort of absolute authority. But certainly, it's true in Hindu ashrams and in Buddhist ashrams. I mean, this is the norm. This is another one of these concepts that has lived on for thousands of years, that because many of us have reasonable experiences on our own and we're in communication with each other, we're able to sort of stand back and look at that, and also look at the facts of the lives of these supposed gurus and see that actually they're just exactly like the rest of us, maybe worse.
which goes to the second point, which I was just looking at how we language this, and maybe it would say, we should have said, are our masters really divine beings or
Yeah,
so?
yeah, yeah,
Because
yeah,
the way with the way it was drafted here makes it sound like they are, but
yeah,
that
yeah, yeah. I was trying to draw out conversation
I
with that,
know,
but
I
yeah,
know, I know. So this was Widge kind of saying, but are they, and questioning that. But so what Widge is saying is they're not divine beings. They're not divine, is what Widge is saying, in the sense of divine meaning what? Being being this perfect, can't make a mistake being. Now,
yeah.
that goes to this next question, which is there any such thing as a divine being? So what you want to talk about that, and what was introduced in the 30th November talk in terms of divine, the whole divinity issue?
Oh, you might have, why don't you run with it and I'll jump in? I'm not sure I know exactly what you're talking about. So.
Okay, I'll run with this one.
Okay.
So the what came out of the 30th November talk, and this is something that I've always questioned, to be honest, not just this lifetime, but for many many lifetimes, this notion: is there anything to this notion of a divine being? Divine, in the way I'm thinking of it anyway, is a perfect being that can't make a mistake, that is omniscient.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's the way I'm thinking of divine. I'm not thinking of divine as really, really, really incredibly self-aware. Sure, there are beings who are more self-aware and have thought things through a little bit more clearly than other beings. There are plenty of them here on planet Earth. uh, and it depends on what subject matter you want to talk about. You want to talk about life, or you want to talk about chemistry or mathematics? I mean, there are PhD chemistry teachers at MIT, where I used to work, who people would consider, figuratively speaking, divinely inspired chemistry teachers or whatever, but they're not divine in the way that we're talking about here. Okay. And so that what we're meaning here is can do no wrong, cannot make
Yeah.
a mistake.
Yeah.
And so my experience and in talking with Jehovah and Jesus and all the other beings who many people have viewed as divine
Yeah.
is that they don't view themselves that way. So that's one filter you can think about. Or again, what did I say at the beginning of this session? I keep reminding you guys, you don't have to believe what I'm saying, but let me talk about myself. So so you guys know I have memories of being with Jesus, and I have memories that I talk about in my third book there, After the Afterlife, my third book. I talk about explicit memories of being with him, and I talk about some memories of him, what we would call in the context of what we're talking about now, having made mistakes and having gotten frustrated with people not listening to his messages. He got frustrated, in other words. Jesus did. And so did that lead him to make some mistakes subsequent that I talk about in the book, which I don't want to get into here, right now. But yeah, in my opinion, that it did. So, but many people view him as divine. So for me, when I hear people talking about him as divine in the way that we're talking about today, which is he can do no wrong, the sole son of God thing, which he never talked about himself as. If I hear people talking about that, then I know that either they were not with him or that they might have been with him and then went into a Catholic convent or a Catholic or a monastery in many lifetimes since then and got colored by the Roman Catholic Church. You want to comment on that? Any of that?
Yeah. Yeah. One thing that came, I mean, one thing that like reasons that the divine concept of doesn't make a lot of sense. It's like if there if there if there were a divine personage overseeing us and he allowed something like the Holocaust to happen in Germany, 80 years ago, um, you know, then how does that work? I mean, how would he not have stopped that? And how can we presume to think he's going to help us find our earbuds if we lose them or our car keys or something? I mean, this just doesn't the whole construct doesn't make much sense. And it's by getting together as friends and sort of talking it through that we stimulate each other to think it through more carefully. We realize, yeah, it doesn't make much sense. And I think that one of the things that came out in the 30th November address is that, yeah, Jehovah and Jesus have one thought at a time, just like we do. They're really, really, really nice people who really want to help. And their minds work a lot like ours, and they have kind of one thought after another, one thought at a time. They're not omniscient. They don't know all things. Um, and and it would be kind of weird if they did, because a lot of really unfortunate things happen, and they clearly intercede and help some people some of the time, but they don't intercede and help everybody all the time. I mean, they're not aware of everything that's going on. So this notion of divine being probably is something we need to think about. Maybe some of us have more kind of influence in life than others. We have more influence at certain points of our lifetime than others. And maybe that's a better way to think about the difference between beings, is that some are just more influential and use their mind more productively than others. But yeah, so I'm
That's really
editorializing.
good points, Widge. And I want to add a couple things to that. One is
Sure.
that uh, kind of segueing what Widge said, sure, there are beings on the other side who can help us.
Yeah.
And we can reach out to them, and they may be our dead grandmother or grandfather or uh, parents or siblings or just friends, or maybe angels. Angels, I define as you've heard me say this in other sessions. I define angels as beings who've never been in a physical form on any planet anywhere in the universe. So any of those minds can reach out and help us and guide us. People talk about their spirit guides and so forth. So sure, we can get help. That's not the same as them knowing the answers to everything. They might have an insight, just like you might have an insight into something on this side, and you give insight and help to a friend on this side. To me, it's no different. It's friends helping friends. That's the way I like to simplify and think about this, whether the friends are on this side or the friends are on the other side helping us. You know, um, the other thing I wanted to mention is, yeah, like Widge said, he used the example of the Holocaust, but and it's a great, unfortunately, a good example to illustrate the point he was making. But another one that's very close to home for me with some of the work I do with some of the groups where parents have lost children, or children have lost parents, or whatever, and siblings and so forth, in the grief groups that I sometimes work with. That's why you hear so many people get mad at quote unquote capital G God.
Yeah. Yeah.
How could you take away my loved one, God, at this point in my life? How could you allow my son or daughter to kill themselves by suicide? How could you fill in the blank?
Mhm.
Okay.
Mhm.
How could you take away from me my beautiful 3-year-old child who died of cancer? God, why did you do that? And so, this notion that God or some being or what, fill in the blank if you don't believe in God, the universe, some energy source is controlling all this stuff. It just doesn't fit reality. And if you really do believe that, then that's a terrible God to believe in. That's a horrific God to believe in, right? And that's why people get mad in these groups that I sometimes sit in on and help with, right? You want to comment on that, Widge?
Yeah, no, it's exactly right. You know, I was getting, I was, as a joke, sort of mentioning losing your keys or losing your earbuds. And this is about what beings, angels, or people on the other side can do and can't do. I remember one time a friend of mine, a friend of Joe's, Clay Lozier, a friend we both had for a long time.
Clay.
Clay,
Oh my God,
yeah,
Clay. I know Clay.
yeah, great guy. We were at a TM course together in Fairfield, and he was getting ready to leave, and he couldn't find his keys. And he said, "God, can you help me find my keys?" And it just popped into my mind that his keys were at the payphone booth down in the basement of the building we were in. And it just popped into my mind, like, your keys were at the phone booth. Let's go check. Sure enough, that's where they were. It was just, it just popped into my mind. I have no doubt that somebody, that an entity on the other side sort of put it there, couldn't get through to him. It's like they can help with some things, but I mean, my wife would laugh if I were talking about, because I lose things all the time, but occasionally you get some help, you know, but, and they can help with things like that. But when you've got, an entire country's military with a policy to exterminate a certain group of people, like, that's not something you can help with projecting an image or something. It's just, there we all have free will down here, and we can do all kinds of crazy stuff individually. Then when we act as a group, then the free will gets kind of amplified. So they can help in certain ways, but it's still, there's still a lot of free will that impedes and constrains what entities on the other side can do. So
Yeah, yeah. It's great. Let's go to the next point, and then
yeah,
CC, I
yeah.
see your question. And
Good.
if you could hang around, and after we do this last point, we're going to open it up, the Q&A. We'll open up the forum up, and if you could ask that question, that would be great. Or I can read it then later if you if for some reason you're not in a place where you can you know, turn your audio on and ask it later. But let's talk about this last point, and then we'll get to the Q&A, which, yeah.
Okay. So life is often challenging. If reincarnation is really a thing, and since we can expect that we all make mistakes or have made mistakes in our past, then aren't we here as punishment for our past deeds? Like, if we're here, aren't we, at least in part, being punished for our past deeds?
Yeah.
Um,
So let's again define terms first, for those for
okay.
whom this term reincarnation may be a new term. So reincarnation just means getting having the choice to be reborn and come back your soul can get, you can choose to go into another physical, biological body and come back to, in our case, planet Earth, and have another lifetime here. And you can choose your gender, you can choose your parents if you want to, you can choose a family, or you can set out sort of a life plan. Sometimes people call it a soul plan or whatever beforehand if you want to. So you want to comment on that, Widge?
Yeah, no, I think that's sort of our understanding. Um, but we come in with a little bit of a plan, sort of an agenda, and then life happens, and some parts of that agenda or plan are possible and activated, some parts aren't. um, there's free will, and there's also everybody else's free will, and somebody's free will may decide to keep driving the car when I'm in a crosswalk. I mean, things just happen to people, good people and bad people.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
so we come back in, but the whole the question of punishment
Mhm.
for our past acts is the topic that I sort of wanted to get into. Are we really here as punishment, and are we really punished for what we do? Is this all just part of a cycle of punishment, or is it more sort of a cycle of us trying to learn as we go?
Yeah. So I think of it more as the latter.
Yeah.
Because first of all, let's talk about the punishment idea, and then we'll come back to the latter idea
Okay.
about learning. Because if if implicit in the way Widge wrote this last bullet point is that there is something outside of us that's making us come back to be punished for our past deeds. That there's
Mhm.
either some energetic force or some group of beings or a being that's making you come back. And that has not been my experience. My experience and my memories, you guys know, my memories go back 6,000 years in Earth years, and my memories include remembering being on the other side in various forms and doing stuff and this and that. Uh, and I choose to come back. Nobody has ever made me come back. And I've chosen to hang out on the other side for short periods and long periods and medium length periods on the other side for various reasons. And then I choose to come back. So nobody's making me. So the whole idea of punishment in the way Widge has worded this, and he intentionally worded it this way, I know, because to try to question he's trying to question the notion, the belief that some people have that they're forced to come back, that you have to come back and you have to atone for your bad deeds.
Yes. Yes.
And there's if there is if there is a God, let's just talk about God, capital G. I think we need to assume, and I think most people would agree with me. Most reasonable people would. I think all reasonable people would agree that I think we need to assume that God is smarter than human beings, right? If there is a God, capital G, that God, whether he or she or it is omniscient or not, we don't need to debate that anymore. But it's smarter than human beings, right? I hope so. If God isn't, then that's not somebody I would call God. I would just
Yeah.
call it another Joe Schmo over there, not as smart as human beings. But assuming that that's the case, smarter than human beings, we human beings already know that punishment doesn't change behavior. It doesn't atone, it doesn't make people atone for their past deeds. Just punishing somebody. You have to
Mhm.
do more than punishment. Do you have to? There needs to be education. There needs to be a whole other change. If you really want to change behavior, there needs to be
Yeah.
incentives
Incentive.
built in to feed the person's self-interest and self-esteem and all of that. Because we know that just locking somebody up in prison on planet Earth, they don't come out like, they do a 180. No, in fact, the recidivism rate is 60 to 70%. It's like really high. People go right back into prison right after they get out.
Yeah.
You know, it's 60 to 80% back in prison. So prison alone, punishment alone, does not change behavior. It may change it short term, but not long term. Yeah, go ahead. Which?
No, it's just so this idea that just because there's reincarnation, that we're necessarily coming back to pay for our past mistakes doesn't hold. The two are not connected. We might have we might choose to learn certain things, and we might even opt in for some challenging circumstances in order to get more of an understanding of life on Earth and more of an understanding of just how life works. We're it seems that we're here to learn, and we can put ourselves in challenging circumstances in order to do that. But punishment, karma as punishment, doesn't really hold up. And then yeah, so it's yeah, as you look at that, then the ideas that have flowed out of that are a parallel or an associate idea is dharma, which then leads people into thinking about castes and certain groups of people being better than other groups of people, and it just doesn't. It because we've had 4 or 5 thousand years to watch how that whole body of thought works in the East. We've seen it in India, and it it it, it devolves into conclusions that really just don't make any sense. That different castes of people are better than others, and you evolve up through different castes. It just doesn't work. So anyway, I thought it would be good to kind of juxtapose these two ideas: reincarnation versus karma and paying for our mistakes, and explore whether you can have one, i.e., reincarnation, without really having the punishment part of karma.
Yeah, I think it's a good juxtaposition because I hear that a lot from people. Like, you got to go back to Earth, as if Earth is a punishment place, that somehow Earth is lesser than heaven, and therefore you got to go back now. No, we come back, and some of you may think, wait a minute, I chose to come back. I've had this terrible life and so forth. Well, yeah, the reality is that you did. I'm sorry to tell you and be direct, but you did. And so, I don't know why you did. That's between you and yourself to figure out between now and your next lifetime. And so, hopefully, when you don't have a biological body again, it'll become clearer for you on the other side why you made that choice. But you can start now, is what I suggest. People start now, start thinking about, well, why might I have chosen to come into this situation and be in this very, I'll give you a personal example myself. And I don't remember how much detail I get into it in this book about the difficulty of my relationship with my father. I didn't want to make it a psychotherapy book, but this is about my past lives. And I thought, I had this realization, I don't know when, 10, 15 years ago or something, which is recent for me since this stuff has been opening up for me for 50 years. But sometime in the last 10 or 15 years, I had this realization of why I chose to come into the family I did this lifetime as Kelvin Chin.
Hmm.
And why did I choose to have that guy as my father, who was like oil and water, screaming and yelling, screaming at each other, from age 10 to about 19 years old. 9 years. As soon as my hormones started pumping, man, it's like, look out. Anyway, why? And I realized it was because of my mother. It
Yeah.
was because of my desire to be with my mother again, who was my mother in another lifetime, at least one other lifetime, but one major lifetime of mine that I talk about in my book. That's why I came in, and that into that particular family. And she had already married this guy, so that I kind of inherit the father, right? you know. So there's these ways. I use that as an example because some of you may be thinking, why did I go into that family? You may have gone into that family because of an aunt or an uncle who was related to that family who's not even part of your nuclear family, or a sibling or something like that. So, because a lot of times, a lot of these spiritual teachers, they talk about the parents. You choose your parents, and a lot of people go, my parents, they both suck, So that's what some people, but no, it's like, but you have to broaden you have to broaden the microscope, if you will, if you use an analogy. You're looking at the granular stuff, but you need to just broaden it a little bit, not be too myopic about why you may have chosen to come into that family. Now, the other thing is this, the other teaching lesson here is you may have not been thinking it through very well. There's a lot of people who have not thought things through well. They may have liked a certain thing, a certain superficial thing about the person, and not realize that that person had some personality, more than quirks, personality. I don't know what the word is, but personality traits that were really, really bad, whatever word that is.
Flaw.
Right? And then they get into the family or into that marriage or into that whatever relationship it is. And then that person, all that bad negative stuff comes out. We've all done stuff like that, and it's not to say, and like Witch said earlier, we cannot control everything. We certainly cannot control what other people's minds are choosing to do. That's their responsibility. But my teaching lesson to myself first, my lessons are always to myself first, and then to my students secondarily, is think things through as best you can before, and then nobody's perfect. Everybody makes mistakes. All right.
Yeah, good point. Good point.
So let's go on to open it up to Q&A for the last half hour. Cece, do you want to ask your question? Do you want to? I'm going to turn the share screen off here. Stop share.
Oh, nice.
Cece, do you want to ask? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I can go ahead. So, yeah, when we're talking about divinity, and it's something that was alluded to in the 30th November talk, and I think I've heard you say that we should not worship God, like God doesn't need to be worshipped. So then, then, um, then why do we have this desire to worship? And then if not God, then whom do we worship? Because I feel like we would have a void, and then how do we feel that? Because I thought the idea is something outside of ourselves that is more worthy than us. Or is that just indoctrination?
Well, there's a lot of parts to your question, and I think I'll comment on this first, and then Would you can add if you feel like. The thing is, in the 30th November talk that CC is referring to, if you haven't heard it, you should go to 30thnovember.com and listen to that talk there. But Jehovah gives a message, and many people view Jehovah as God, capital G, whether you're Christian or Jewish or Muslim. I mean, they use the phrase Allah, or whether you're
Yahweh,
yeah, or whether you're out of the Hindu or Buddhist tradition. Buddhists don't believe in a capital G God, but they sure view Buddha pretty much as that. they may not call him capital G God, but their view of Buddha is like it's the way it's very divine. Let's just say the way we were talking about it before. And the Hindus, they got Krishna and so forth. And again, they may not say, "Oh, Krishna's our God," but whatever, But this notion that, let's just talk about Jehovah. Jehovah has made it clear, not just before the 30th November talk, but I've had separate communications with him and so of others. So it's not just, one or two people. And he's made it very clear that he doesn't view himself as God, but he's also made it clear, and so is Jesus, that if you want to continue to view them in this godlike manner, this divine manner, that's okay. They're not saying you can't, because they understand free will, and that's your free will choice. Free will just means choice, by the way. But let me one comment on free will. I'm not using free will as moral authority. So any of you who've studied any religious stuff, that's not where I'm using the phrase free will in a very straightforward, simple way that just means, can you make your own decisions? Yes or no? And so if you can, then you have free will. So Jehovah, Jesus, and all of our friends on the other side, they recognize you make your own decision. So they're not saying you can't view them or worship them. CC, you certainly can continue to, if that makes you comfortable, they're fine with that. But what they're saying is that they don't view themselves in that divinity role. And in fact, moreover, Jehovah has come even further since after the 30th November talk and made it very clear to a number of us. He's come to me individually and others. But what he said to me was, he wants people to understand that he now realizes that the way he may have allowed and maybe even encouraged people to view him in that kind of divine role, that's for those of you who study the Bible, which I have not, but those of you who have know what I'm talking about in especially the Old Testament version of Jehovah. Um, he's now saying that he regrets that and realizes that that has actually created potentially more suffering in people, because that blind following mentality of blindly following God and following the rules of God, because if you didn't, then you would be sinning, basically, and all of everything that goes along with that, has created a fear in people, and also not only a fear in people, but also a devotional aspect, to be devoted to God. And the problem with that is people have not properly developed an equal amount of discernment. Discernment means the ability to distinguish between who you should be devoted to and who you should not be devoted to. And if you're only developing a devotional mentality of being devoted, love, 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 accept everything, everybody, accept everybody, then you don't have this discernment ability, the ability to distinguish between being devoted and accepting an abusive person versus somebody who is a giving, loving person. And that's, in a nutshell, what he is concerned about in terms of humanity going forward, that they instead develop more of a ability to discern and distinguish who they should share their love and acceptance with. Now, Jesus has a different definition of love, or not a different, but a more let's say a nuanced definition of love, which allows us to accept the other person for who they are by not changing them into something they don't want to be. So that's a more nuanced version of love, as opposed to just accepting everything about them. Okay. And so I like Jesus' definition, because it's not just accepting everything about the person, including their bad behavior. No, we reject that. Yeah. But does that help? So why do people worship? This is another part of your question, CC, and you can come back and ask Widge and me, and I'll let Widge comment also in a sec. But you can come back and ask us, what we left out. But why do people worship? Well, that's such a personal thing, CC. I mean, I can't speak to that. I mean, why somebody do that? I mean, I suppose some people worship, look to worship others because they feel insecure inside. And other people may not feel so insecure, may worship for other reasons because they really, really respect somebody else. So I mean, there's a huge range of reasons. I don't think there's one reason, but would you want to comment on any of that?
Yeah, I wanted to pick up on one point, and it gets back to this eternal nature of everything in our life, of ourselves, of each other, of the world itself. If we are eternal, then there never was a God, the creator. And a lot of us, particularly with the Judeo-Christian background, think of God as the creator. And when we kind of think more clearly about that, realize that actually we've probably always been around and will always be around with this notion of eternal life. The notion of a creator God sort of doesn't exist. So So right away, Cece, that sort of changes who you're worshiping. It's probably not a God, the creator. And so then you have to ask yourself, is this God the only God, or could there be other, So what is God? Is it capital G God, or are there various divinities you might call upon or worship or appreciate? So our our notion of God is just very influenced by.
Yep, just lost Widge. Widge, can you hear me? We just lost you. Can you hear him, Joe? Yes or no? No. I see you're shaking your head, Marlene. Let me shoot him can you shoot him a text, Joe? And can you shoot him a text and just tell him that we lost his audio, although he's still technically on. So I'll kind of continue, and then Widge can get back on. You may tell. Go ahead, Marlene. Yeah.
Have you and Widge been in another life together that either of you remember?
Yes, we have. Yeah.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Continue.
Yeah, that's a good question. That's interesting. Yeah. Yes, we have. Um, oh, he's coming back in. Here's Widge coming back in. Here we go. He just was in the waiting room. No, that's a good question, Marlene. Very astute. Yes, the answer is yes. And Widge and I just met really 4 years ago in 2020 on Facebook. So even though we used to teach meditation and so forth years ago, we didn't ever knew each other then. We didn't know each other in the 1970s. We just and we really just physically face to face met. Well, Widge and I physically face to face met in 2014. He claims, and I believe him. But I was organizing the event, and I was just running around like a chicken without my head cut off, with my head cut off, chicken with no head, trying to make sure the catering was doing all the, the lighting was work, the camera people were all there and all this stuff. So I don't remember, but Widge and I met, I guess, in 2014, but we face to face met the one I remember is a year ago, but we met on Facebook 4 years ago. Yeah, but we've had a past life together. Yeah. So, Widge, finish what you were saying.
I kind of forgot where I was. Just that our notion of God may be. Can you guys hear me? Okay. Can
Yes.
you hear it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just that our notion of God may need to be tweaked a little bit based on sort of what we've learned from each other and from our own experiences in this life. That maybe our notion of God is more reflective of what people were thinking a few thousand years ago.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it is. Oh, here's a good example. You hear people talk about NDEs and their NDEs very often. There's, I don't know, thousands and thousands of YouTube videos. People talk about their near-death experiences. NDE stands for near-death experiences. And they go to the other side and then they come back. And how many of them have you ever heard say, well, I went to the other side and I spoke to God, or I spoke to Jesus, or I spoke to Allah, or I spoke to Muhammad or Buddha, or whatever. If you listen carefully, there's a theme that runs through, which is it's going through their belief system. And there's an assumption that they're making that light being who was very powerful and seemed you could feel the energy from them and all this stuff, that was God, Jesus, we fill in the blank, depending on what their filter is telling them at that moment, right? So that's very common. And the NDE, I think, is a genuine experience that they're having, but how they're interpreting it is my point, tends to be through their filter. And so when you have communications, to Widge's last point, from the other side, and you start to be aware that you're having communications from the other side and that they're influencing your life in some way, maybe you don't have direct communication, but you feel like, well, how did I know where those car keys were that Clay Lozier had lost? It's over, and then some people, maybe not you, Widge, would immediately interpret that as God came to me and showed me where the car keys was. Okay. So from a certain religious belief standpoint, that's how somebody's going to filter it if they are steeped in that particular belief system, right? And it's a real experience. Maybe you did get help finding the car keys, but the interpretation, it could have been it could have been your dead grandmother telling you.
Yeah.
We don't know. And then all of a sudden your dead grandmother's going, yeah, no, he's calling me God. Finally, I'm getting some respect now that I'm dead. He's calling me God now.
Yeah.
Does that help, Cece? Does that help?
It does in a way, but then it also leaves people unmoored then. So that means it's, I guess it's a perspective shift that you can really just go through life not worshiping anything else.
Again, that's a choice that each individual can choose to make. And so if you're asking me, can you? Sure. I don't worship anything or anybody. I don't worship a thing, and I don't worship a person or a being. And worship means give myself over to anything that they might say or tell me to do. That's how I view worship. Respect, there are lots of beings I respect on this side and the other side. Respect, I have incredible respect for Jehovah, Jesus, Maharishi John the Baptist, Yogananda, all kinds of beings on the other side, Shankara, Vyasa. I have incredible amount of respect, but we have conversation, just like with any friend. I view them more as friends, and I think you may have heard that, Cece, in the 30 November talk. That was one of the suggestions, maybe a request. I don't know how you want to think about it, but from them, that we think of them more as friends as opposed to beings to worship. Yeah.
And one thing I might add to that, too, just not to put too fine a point on it, but this friendship involves a two-way exchange of ideas and concepts. And I think they gain from us, and we obviously gain a lot from them. Sorry, this is for me. Okay. So it's a real two-way exchange, and their ideas are changing and evolving based on our experiences. So again, they have this massive class essentially down here with all of us, thousands and thousands of us turning within every day. They're learning a ton from what we're coming up with. So it's not like they're the absolute knowers of all knowledge and we're a bunch of peons. It's kind of a collaborative effort. And to me, to a shocking degree, frankly, some of their most fundamental precepts from thousands of years ago have undergone serious revision. And these are topics we've discussed here today. I mean, this notion of merging and unity, I mean, that's been well accepted dogma for thousands of years. And it's pretty much out the window. I mean, this is collaborative evolutionary process of clarifying our thinking. And they're as interested in our experiences and our views as we are in theirs. So it's a real two-way street. That's just something that we weren't I mean, we didn't know it was going to end up this way, but it is kind of the way it's looking.
That's a really, really good point, Widge. That's a great point. Marlene, did you have another? You got to unmute yourself. You're muted.
I guess for me, there's a big difference between worshiping and being grateful and feeling that you're blessed. Also, creation, I kind of took it as this earth was created for a place for us on the other side, that God created this place for us to come and live on and have experiences on. I never really thought about him, I guess, creating our energy. I mean, and if we were created in his image, that would seem to be some type of human like image.
Yeah. So yeah, first into your worship. Yeah, praise. That's a very nice way. I mean, to me, being thankful, that falls into what I was kind of saying, respectful. Respectful, thankful. Do I really thank and embrace and appreciate? So
Mhm.
that's what praise really kind of means, right? Yeah. I think there's nothing to me, I feel that, but I don't worship in the way that I was talking about worship. Yeah. Um, so yeah, it's interesting. This whole created in the image of, I think that's just it's not just a it's not just that's just not just a Christian thing. That's a
Oh,
you go back
no.
to Zoroastrianism, you go back to these ancient religions. They've all said basically the same thing. It's like a way to there's a notion that George talks about, and I've borrowed his term now, the importance of being important. And when you feed that in somebody, that you're so important, you humans, you're so important that I God created I used my own image to create you are in my image. It makes people feel like, oh wow, God looks like me, like, and it so that's a note, because the thing is, does that even logically make sense? Because if on the other side we are energy and don't have a biological body, does God have a biological body on the other side that you can see as a biological physical body? No. We're energy. We are light beings on the other side. We are energy. So it's a phrase, it's a thing. And again, it gets this long before Christianity. Christianity has borrowed a lot of stuff from previous religions, and they plunked that into what they called the Bible, and they decided this was going to be the official Bible. These 300 plus, early Christian bishops in about 360 AD, almost 400 years after Jesus died. That's when they came up with this Bible. But the Bible is based on Paul's teachings, and I talk about that in my third book. My memories are of that. But so that's a whole other story. One thing I want to comment about what you talk about, Marlene, is about source and that, creation, the creation of Earth. Could the Earth have been created? Yeah, it's possible. Could somebody have created? It's possible. But what Widge is saying is that he's referring to our souls having an um, eternal aspect to them, or eternal character, I guess, to our souls, which means no beginning, no end to our souls. Could somebody have created humans, and then we just came into these human bodies? Yes, that is possible. So there could be a creator of humans. But what was I and what were you before we were humans? I have memories of being an animal, so I talk about that in my book. But even before that, there are other life forms that we could have been in a physical form. Our soul could have manifested in a physical form that's not even what we recognize here on Earth as a human or an animal. Yeah. So, but Widge's point is, if we are eternal, which is what it logically seems to be, you can't prove eternity by experience, by definition, right? Because you can't experience eternity. But eternity, because what's eternal is that which is uninfluenced by the continuum of change. That's what eternal means. Uninfluenced by the continuum of change. Well, where do we live? We live in the continuum of change. Things are changing. Kelvin's waving his arms around and hands around. It's changing. So, but logically, it seems like our soul is eternal. And yes, to your kind of underlying question, sure, somebody could have created stuff for us. That's possible. Yeah.
I have a question about the November 30th talk.
Yeah.
There, even George mentions that God was different from even the way he sat was different, the way that his image was a little different than everyone else's. And there was also, I don't know if he said no name or
He who has no
yeah,
name.
no name, is that what it was?
Yeah,
Yeah.
he who has no
That
name.
was
That was a joke. That was a Harry Potter joke. George, so George does this thing. So George also was Mark Twain in a previous life. And if you know anything about Mark Twain, the author, he's always throwing in these side jokes. And George and I have been best friends. We've been friends for 4,000 years that we're aware of. And and I still don't get some of his jokes. Sometimes it's just like, boop, goes right over my head. And I go, and he goes, that was a joke. I said, oh, really? Oh, I missed that. So that was a joke when he was talking about that he who has no name thing.
Right. Yeah.
That's a Harry Potter joke about, you know, Voldemort and all that, you know, the bad guy in it. He was joking.
Okay.
That was an inside joke that they're teasing Jehovah about. Jehovah is the opposite of Voldemort, okay, just to be clear. But no, what was the beginning part of your question?
Well, my really main question was, did he have more leeway into creating situations like the experiment and things like that?
This was just a sociological experiment. That's the way you need to think about it. You need to think of them, the group on the other side, as social scientists trying to help humanity. They're not trying to pull puppet strings and manipulate people.
Why do you, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Why do we view God as something bigger? Why? Oh, never mind. Society.
Yeah, I mean, you know, culturally, and you know, which do you have a comment on that?
Well, yeah, it's sort of the way I see it is it's sort of like we had a predisposition to view it that way at that point in time. And we sort of interpreted what he was saying in those terms, and he sort of seems to have gone with it. You know, we were predisposed and it worked well for their social experiment. They wanted to see us progress and develop as human beings. And laying down some more guidelines about how to live seemed like a really good idea to them. And religion seemed like a good kind of transmission mechanism, a way to get that to happen. And so they, you know, helped foster some sort of religious beliefs to guide humanity. And that gets back to Jehovah's point that he views his experiment with those dusty, what do you call them, dusty, straight-necked people in the Middle East as being a complete unqualified success. It was a religion, but it brought that group of people very far forward to the point that they are really the leading source of creativity and artistry and medicine on the planet today. So it was a social development experiment that, because of our predispositions at the time, ended up being a religion.
So you got to understand, Marlene, what was the goal of this social experiment? Is to get people from stop killing each other and sacrificing each other in the name of God. Now, are there members of this group killing each other right now in the Middle East? Yes.
Yes.
Because there are members of any group who are going to splinter off and kind of do crazy stuff, right? But when he says unqualified success, he's not talking about those splinter groups. He's talking about the mass of people he was experimenting with. That did they start to become more creative and productive in their various industries or areas of the various societies around the world? Yes. Is there a core group of extremists in the Middle East right now who came out of that religious tradition, who are doing the "I'm more important than you are" thing, and and if you don't believe me, I'm going to show you by blowing you up thing? Yeah. And was that, you know, part of what his social experiment, Jehovah's social experiment, was trying to do it, undo? Yeah. But that's a splinter group compared to the rest of them around the world and so forth, that out of that group. So that's what he means by unqualified success. And because I know that some people have railed against, even before the recent Middle East, Gaza and Palestinian flare up, well, other things that have come up. But there's just, that's why he said, if you listen carefully in the 30th November talk about Jehovah's, his message to the Jews was, don't be tied to the land. Don't be tied to the land. And what are the extremists thinking in the Middle East? They are tied to the land, right? So anyway, yeah, that was a good question. That's good questions. Yeah. Anything else? Andrew? Erica?
You do.
Anything else? Marlene? Anything else?
Yes, I do. I'll give everybody else a chance, and then if you don't mind, I will, unless you're ending up.
Well, no, yeah, go ahead and ask because I'm going to wrap it in the next 5 minutes. So go ahead.
Oh shoot. Okay, if it's free will, then people can choose to come back because as if they were narcissists before and they had a good experience and they do that. If we're all trying to work towards being better people, more loving, kind people, then why is there this continuum to go the other way?
Well, I think the adjustment in what you said in the last sentence you said, or the second to last sentence, you said, if we're all trying to be more loving and kind or whatever else you said, I think the word is, you got to get out of there as all. So if some of us, or you could say many of us, but it's never all, that's the issue. Okay. So the biggest thing I think that we need to be careful of when we're languaging these things is this absolute. This is everything, everybody, all the time, always. That's what I mean when I say absolute. We got to get those words out of it, out of our conversation, because when we do that, we reinforce the wrong belief system in our own mind. That creates a false expectation. And then when somebody's abusive to us, we are surprised. We shouldn't be surprised because there are abusive people out there. Now, this goes to your question, underlying question of why does an abusive person abuse? Because they get happiness out of it. That's why. Now, you don't, but they do. Why do they get happiness out of abusing somebody? Because they have such low sense of self-esteem that they have to make other people around them feel miserable. And when they bully other people, they make other people feel miserable around them, they feel better. And I've done that. We've all done that in small ways, but a narcissist does it all the time. That's the way they live their life. Okay. We've all had moments when we're tired or we got low blood sugar or whatever, and we snap at somebody, and we do it. Why? Because it makes us feel better, because we get a little release. It's a release of tension. And you could say that's like, I'm not getting happiness in the sense of being a cruel person. I want to make them unhappy, but it does make me feel better when I yell, if I'm really like tired and I just snap, okay? Because you release. That's a form of happiness in the way I'm defining happiness in a very, 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 very broad sense, okay? And that's a form of negative behavior, I think we would all agree. But the narcissist, to your point, keeps coming back and wants to be narcissistic and abusive because it works for them, and it has worked for them. It's very difficult for a narcissist to change their bad behavior unless and until they themselves start to see, geez, now I got 50, now I got 100, now I got 500, now I got 1,000 miserable people around me. Or in some cases with some political leaders, now I have 30 million miserable people around me, and I just made them more miserable just to make myself happier. So that thinking takes, I mean, arguably it may never change in that person. Or if it does, it has to get to that breaking point where they just go, oh my God, they have sometimes you heard this phrase, the dark night of the mystic, where they're not even thinking of themselves as mystic. They're not, but they just have a dark night and they just go, wow, I got to change something about myself. And some people can get to that point. I'm hopeful, but we're talking, probably 100 or 1,000 lifetimes for somebody like that.
Real quick, if I have free will to either stay in that type of relationship or leave it,
Yeah.
and I keep my kids in that kind of relationship and it really screws up their lives and mine, did I affect their soul plan by my free will decision not to distance themselves from an abusive life?
It doesn't really matter what their soul plan was or wasn't. You're affecting their lives. That's all you care about, right? Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, you have my purple book, right?
Yes. Yeah. I love it.
Fifth page 54. I know I know exactly what page it's on because I cite this essay all the time. The nuances of forgiveness. And in your case, based on what you just said, sounds to me like you're in what I call the fourth degree, the fourth whatever degree of forgiveness. Not the little one, the big one. Say,
Oh,
see you
yeah.
later. I don't know, like
It's a big one.
yeah, it's a big one. And if it's ill affecting children and so forth, yeah. It's like, it's not easy to navigate. I'm not making light of this. It's very difficult because it can be very complicated and so forth, the dynamic with the children and the spouse and the this and the that. I get it. But yeah, you can still forgive and leave a relationship. That is possible, and I talk about it in detail in that essay. Yeah. Yeah. Andrew, I saw you unmute. Did you have a question?
No, just I was going to say it's been a great evening. I've been driving back from London to the countryside. It's been great being with a group of friends, and it's lovely to hear yourselves, Kelvin and William. Thanks for a great talk.
Yeah, you're very welcome. Yeah, drive carefully. Good to hear from you over in London. That's great. In England. Cool. Anything else before we wrap it, Marlene? No, you good? Good for now. You can come back, ask some more questions next month. So thank you so much, Widge. This has been great conversation. Really happy to, really glad that you and I kind of connected on this and are putting together these different ideas. It's really good.
I'll be traveling this time next month, but I look forward to joining you the one after.
Sounds good. So we'll see you guys next month. Again, we do it monthly, as obviously the name implies, on the 30th of the month at 12 Pacific time. Again, you can find this recording on my YouTube channel, as I mentioned earlier, or on the website, kelvinchin.org. You can go back and watch all the previous sessions. They're all there on both my YouTube channel. There's a separate playlist that's called Afterlife 30th Monthly Q&A or something like that. There's a special playlist that has them all on my YouTube channel, or they're on that kelvinchin.org website page. Great. Thank you so much. Great.
Bye, everybody. Bye then. Cheers.
Thank you very much.
Take care. See you guys.
It's fun.